Brilliant, thanks. There is handouts on your desks with more information on that. Any questions? I think there are details. You can get in touch with Greg. We're now on to a topic that's really out of the MA's headlines, pub rates. Bath operator Joe Cussens spent a lot of time in lockdown picking apart the idiocy of the system. He's here to highlight those concerns and call for action. Over to you, James.
Hello everybody, nice to be here with you. So as Ed says, I'm Joe, I'm the MD of the Bath Pub Company. We operate 4 pubs in Bath, and I'm going to share with you today the journey I've been on understanding the business rate system, why I believe it's broken and what we can do about it. So this is our pub, the Morber Tavern. This is the first pub that we opened back in 2006. When we opened it then, our rates bill was just under £5,000. I didn't really know anything about business rates. It was just another unremarkable overhead. A few years later, our rates had more than doubled to £13,000. Nasty, but it was affordable. After 2017, our annual bill was facing us was £35,000, so £30,000 more, or 600% higher than when we started off. By now, we'd opened 2 more pubs where the pattern was repeated. Huge increases in our rates bills, driven by huge increases in our 2017 rateable values. 2017 average increase of rates for pubs was 17%. Ours went up on average by about 150%. We were now paying many more times than competitors where historically we'd all paid pretty much the same. Something felt very wrong indeed. This unremarkable overhead now well and truly had my attention. So I needed help to sort this out. I spoke to a few ratings agents, but I have to say I wasn't particularly encouraged by what I heard back from them. Most of them seemed to want to negotiate a token reduction for a hefty commission, and it wasn't really what I was after. I was after something far more far-reaching. But the subject was impenetrable to me. You needed somebody with a good knowledge of ratings law, economics, the system. That wasn't me. Luckily, I was just about to meet such a person. This is Mark Vaslowski. Who I got that right? Mark is here somewhere. Mark is an ex-city financial analyst with an economics degree from Oxford. He had mounted a challenge with the VOA, and he has all of the skills you need to unpick the system. He has the patience, he has a forensic knowledge of the system, and through his tutelage I gradually came to understand how the whole system worked, how my valuations had come about. And I have to say, as I went on that journey, the more I learned, the more appalled I became about how we'd ended up with such a regime for the pub industry. Let me show you what I mean. Mark had got in touch with me actually. He'd seen a submission I made to the Treasury Select Committee on the impact of business rates, and that's how we got in touch. An email arrived in my inbox in the middle of lockdown with this chap offering to help me. And thank goodness he did. But let's start with some business rates basics. So they're a property tax. Your rates bill is derived from the rateable value of your property. The rateable value is supposed to equate to the open market rent a vacant to let property can command. The rateable value is set by the VOA, which is by the HMRC. They revalue commercial properties every 5 years usually, although the 2015 valuation was pushed back a couple of years. The VOA have a statutory duty to carry out valuations and to maintain an accurate rating list. Valuations have to be reasonable. Now, interestingly enough, that definition used to say reasonable and fair, but appropriately enough they dropped the fair bit as they were clearly having problems living up to that. So the way that the VOA values pubs is set out in this guide. This is the VOA's approved guide to valuation of public houses. The practices and the arguments set out in this guide will set the tone for all the dealings that you have with the VOA. It seeks to define the appropriate manner to value pubs. It plays a major role in challenges and appeals. Essentially, it sets out how they go about doing the valuations. It has no legal recognition. The processes that are defined in here is simply the VOA's proposed manner to value pubs. There is no legal stipulation about how they do valuations, and it has no legal backing. The only degree of legitimacy it has is given to it by the endorsements of our trade associations, who have their logo on the front of it. The VOA point to the guide at every twist and turn, all your deals with them, and they'll say that this guide and the practices in it have been agreed with industry trade representatives. So this is what the VOAs say that they do. This is the contents of the guide. They say, first of all, they'll request your actual turnover data. Starting from that point, they will then estimate the fair, maintainable trade they believe a hypothetical, reasonably efficient operator will be able to generate at the pub. So your actual trade is just a start point. They say that they're just going to then estimate the typical reasonable amount of trade that will be able to generate. They then apply to that figure certain percentages, which they claim will allow them to accurately translate that turnover into the value of an open market rent. These are a couple of pages from inside the guide. The guide is full of tables like this, lots and lots of different percentages. Looks very impressive, doesn't it? So these percentages, there's about 170 of them in all of these pages. The percentage that they apply will depend on the type of revenue that they're looking at, whether it's wet or dry accommodation, geographical region, and then the category that they allocate to, which could be the style of operation you run, whether it's wet or gastropub, town centre, and so on. And within each of these classifications, they also have a minimum and a maximum range that they apply. So that's an awful lot of different percentages, an awful lot of different numbers they can apply. And this is kind of what it looks like, really. So they'll take, this is an example, they'll say a size trade, there's the wet sales, there's the percentage they apply to it, it spits out a number, do the same for the food, that spits out another number, add them together, and there's your rateable value. So there's a couple of outputs that they have once they've concluded this exercise. One is the fair, maintainable trade they believe that theoretical operator could generate there, and one is what they think the open market rent is. So what they've done here, what we're describing here, is a financial model. It's a modelling exercise to allow them to try and determine the rates. So it's termed as a shortcut approach. It's not a recognised valuation method, not recognised in terms of case law. Shortcuts are legitimate, but only if they are accurate. The approach they've got here is not recognised in case law, it's just their proposed approach. RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, a completely different body, independent, respected, they have their own pub valuation guide. It makes no mention whatsoever of using FMT as a credible valuation method. When you look through the guide, a few troubling questions occur to me. First of all, how has this model been developed? What data has been used for it? And who has verified its accuracy? We're being asked to take an awful lot on trust that this model works accurately. And when I've asked the questions to the VOA, you don't get much response. And I have to say, when I've asked the questions to the trade associations, so far, responses I've had haven't been particularly encouraging. So some initial observations about the model itself. It's a convoluted process. It relies on fitting every pub neatly into one of 170 odd different boxes. It's a complex model. Anybody who's ever put together a budget or a spreadsheet will know that a small change in one of the inputs at the top can massively change the number that's spat out at the bottom. Sales are an unreliable indicator of profit. Any operator will tell you that. I had a pub which made a loss every year we ever had it. It had huge sales, never made a profit. The VOA's model assumes that sales equals profit, profit can be used to determine rent. And it uses subjective inputs all over the place. Who's to say what is fair in fair maintainable trade? What is a reasonably efficient operator? They also make assessments on whether or not your site is in a good trading area or a poor trading area. So a complex model unverified, with lots of subjective inputs. Another troubling aspect of their approach is that the way that the VOA have it is they apply a higher percentage of your turnover as rent increases. So the higher your trade, the bigger the percentage of that trade they then translate to a rent figure. Which means that your rent increases not only in absolute terms, but exponentially. In my pubs, as my trade's got bigger and bigger, and my rent has stayed the same, the rent has fallen as a percentage of turnover. Not so with the VOA. So how well does the model perform? Let's have a look at it in a few different ways. First of all, I'm going to look at how this valuation regime has affected the sector as a whole. So this graph looks at rateable value growth for commercial properties, all commercial properties, indexed back to 2005. They rose by about 20%. Over the same period, the VOA had pub rents increasing as at the sector level by 47%, despite the fact that pubs have actually decreased as a sector. It doesn't really look likely to me. Another way that we can look at the accuracy is to apply one of the recognised valuation methods for commercial properties. This is the contractor's basis valuation. What this essentially does is it allows you to translate the cost of building a new building or its freehold market value into an annualised rental figure. It's one of three methods that are recognised by rating case law. Essentially what you do is you take the cost or the freehold value and you apply a decapitalisation rate. That rate is set by Parliament at 4.4%. So we did an exercise. We looked at a whole bunch of freehold pubs, actual pubs for sale. This is dotted about on the chart. Now, rating law states that there should be a close correlation between those freehold values and the market rent that they will command. It would look, in theory, a bit like this. So this is all those pubs plotted on the graph with a decapitalisation rate of 4.4%. Now, in the real world, they wouldn't fit that neatly. You'd expect to see them bounce around a little bit. But there should be a strong and consistent relationship. They should be broadly in that area. But when you plot the actual rents that the VOA believe that those actual live pubs should command, you see something very different. There's a complete arbitrary randomness. They're spread around all over the chart, seeming to suggest to me that the VOA valuations are very wrong. Even if you expanded that expected rate to say, let's cut them some slack, you're still finding the vast majority falling outside that range. Instead of 4.4%, the VOA have some of those freehold pubs with rents of 17%. It seems to be a poor model. Another way of looking at it is some real life examples. This is my hometown, Bath, and this is a map of Bath. This area here is a sort of the central area. We're going to look at three different sites. Now, if the VOA's valuation methods were accurate, you'd expect to see similar sites having similar rateable values. Let's have a little look. So we've got three pubs here, two at the centre, one at the top end of town. They are extremely comparable. They're essentially the same size in the same town, offering the same thing, food and drink. In fact, a couple of them do accommodation. The only real difference is that one is on a sort of residential street, the other two are the town centre. Let's remind ourselves of what the VOA say they're doing with these pubs. They're asking for the actual trade, and then they're stepping back and saying, what do we think the theoretical trade should be for not the actual operator, for just an average operator in here. So, Pub A, they said that they think the rent for that place should be about £16,000 a year. Pub B, the other city centre one, they say the rent should be about £8,900. Pub C, which is our pub, they say the rent should be £59,000. This is exactly the same size as the other two pubs. The only real difference is that rather than being in the city centre, it's stuck on a quiet residential street away from the city centre. Do we really think that these are professional, objective assessments of a theoretical rent level that these pubs could support? Or could it possibly be that they're just taking the actual trade and rentalising that? Now, once you've got the rateable value and you know the wet and dry split between them, you can reverse engineer that to work out the trade that they believe that each of these pubs ought to be supporting. And let's have a little look at that one. First one, they think £284,000 a year that pub should be generating. Next one, 200,000. Whereas our pub, they believe that the average operator should be generating £690,000. It's utter tosh. It's utter nonsense. It's a complete shambles. And then, of course, when they apply the percentages to your turnover, because we've got high turnover, we have a higher percentage applied to it. It's a double whammy. Now, the VOA have something in their guide which is there really to kind of address these inconsistencies. The guide says, having calculated the valuation, it's necessary to stand back and look at it in comparison with other places and say, does that look reasonable? Do we think those look reasonable? Do we think they've done that? If they have, why haven't they done anything on it? I have to say that I could honestly have picked literally dozens of examples. These are not just the best three I've got. I've got the same examples where I can show other pubs, and exactly the same thing is happening time and time again. So, the VOA's approach, deeply flawed. It's an unproven valuation method, producing inaccurate, arbitrary valuations. Even if you thought that their method had some validity, it seems clear that they're not even following their own flawed process properly. I don't believe that they're qualified to accurately estimate hypothetical FMTs. The only thing that they appear to be qualified is being experts in their system and defending their valuations. And how do pubs compare to restaurants? Well, we're going to look here at another real-life example. Restaurants and bars are valued differently. They are valued by square footage. But it's another valuation method. We should be getting to the same figure ultimately. It's two different valuation methods, similar results. Let's have a little look. Got an example here. This is a real-life operator, runs two gastro pubs, same owner, same region. They're about 17 miles apart from each other. One of them, by a quirk of fate, has ended up on the ratings list as a restaurant, and the other one, a pub. As far as the customer is concerned, they are identical styles of operations. They are pubs, selling food and drink, and yet they are, so they're economically indistinguishable. However, the pub, you won't be surprised to hear, is subject to a rate bill 3.5 times higher than the restaurant, despite the fact that it's actually slightly smaller and it's in actually a slightly worse part of town. So another real examples, pubs versus restaurants, back to Bath, so two of my pubs at the top end of town, two restaurants at the bottom end of town. These sites, Giraffe and Grays, they are right in the busiest part of town by the station. So this, according to the VOA, is how they looked at the rents for Giraffe. Fantastic site, big, several times bigger than our site, much better part of town. They say the rateable value for that one should be 30-odd thousand versus our 69,000. It's utter nonsense. It's criminal. This is Grays, fantastic site, flagship site down by Bath Spa, big prime location, huge footprint. They've actually got the rateable value slightly less than the Walker town. This isn't an issue here about my individual valuations being wrong. It is a systemic failure to apply a fair business rates system to pubs. How on earth are we supposed to compete against restaurants and other sectors when we're subject to base bills 3, 4, 5 times higher? And then when you get to the challenge part of the world, you find that this is your troubles mount. It's not fit for purpose. It's impossibly hard to navigate. The notion that an operator who believes they've got unfair rates can successfully go for a challenge, it just isn't true. The subject is too complex and unfathomable and technical. Operators don't have the skill and the time to get their head around it. You quickly get to the point, quite frankly, where you want to give up. It's not designed to allow a fair reassessment of your rateable value. You're up against an adversary who knows all of the tricks, they know the system inside and out, and when they're presented with unfair valuations, they don't engage with you, they just defend the indefensible. They dig their heels in and they will fight you to the end. And unfortunately, I have to say that in my experience, rating agents are not the answer. Pure and simple, their interests are not aligned with yours. To get to the heart of a subject takes time. These guys want to make a commission and move on to the next one. It simply doesn't make sense for them to invest the time that's needed. Under the old system of the challenge system, you could submit multiple evidence as your journey went through your challenge. Now they've changed that. Now only evidence submitted right at the outset that you submit can be considered in a challenge. How on earth are you supposed to come to this subject knowing everything you're possibly going to need to know and submit it in your initial challenge? I found lots and lots of additional stuff I want to bring to bear, but I'm not allowed to bring it. It hugely stacks the odds against the appellant. And then when you get into the guts of your challenge, you find that there's more nonsense in their approved guide. They say that comparisons with other sites, and I've included lots and lots of pages saying, look at the difference here. They say that's not appropriate. It's not relevant. According to the approved guide, attempts to compare different values of different parts is not relevant or appropriate. They say that regard must be had to their trading potential. I'm sorry, the trading potential is driven by its size and location. How can that not be relevant? But they say, in accordance with the approved guide, which has been signed off by the trade, that's what we do. They also say that changes between lists, when you draw attention to them, are not relevant. This graph is our Morgan Tavern. It shows over 10 years an increase of 498%. Apparently that's not relevant. I would say that's highly relevant. But they make the point that it's in the guide and it's going to be ignored. It's impossibly hard to prove over-trading. What they do, first of all, is they basically define any performance level as normal. In the guide it says the valuation is not limited to an average operator, but envisages a wide range of performances, which essentially gives them license to exclude or determine any turnover as normal, and therefore exclude any of your higher turnover as not being above a reasonably efficient operator or over-trading. What they seem to be looking for as evidence for over-trading is some sort of stellar reason, like a Michelin star or you're on the television or something. Whatever evidence you give to them, they just dismiss and say, anybody can do that, that's not evidence. To my mind, over-trading is a result of doing lots and lots of small things really, really well, not some great, stellar single reason. The numbers themselves are the proof of evidence that you're over-trading. But the way that the VOA would have it is that they would dismiss this fellow as not being anything out of the ordinary. They would dismiss, in the same way as they dismiss our trade as relevant, his times wouldn't be relevant. They would say, well, what evidence have you got? What's he doing that's different? He's got the same kit, he's got the same training regimes, he's doing the same sort of things. It's his time that makes him special and a world record holder, in the same way as it's our numbers that define us as over-trading. But according to the VOA, it's not relevant. And the harder you work, the more you pay. Some of our sites, we sweat the asset as hard as we possibly can, opening longer and harder than our competitors. But they say that anybody would do that, and that's not relevant. When you point to a competitor and say, well, hold on, this place is only open for 25% of the week, they'll say, well, that's a different kind of operation and not comparable. They have an argument for everything, and they hide behind their approved guide all the way through. They're valuing, in every instance, the operator, not the property. So, the approved guide is hugely damaging. It contains an unverified, flawed approach which spits out arbitrary, damaging, inaccurate valuations. It undermines the ability for you to have a fair challenge. And the trade associations are extremely harmful. Now, I would say our trade associations have been nothing short of fantastic in terms of COVID. And the way that they've spoken up the industry is quite humbling for me as an operator. However, on this particular issue, I don't feel they've got our back. It's time for change, I say. I don't mind being taxed on my profits or my turnover, but that already happens, VAT and corporation tax. Business rates should be a property tax, pure and simple, but it's not. Currently, we are being subject to tax rates for our businesses way in excess of other sectors, and it needs to change. Trade associations need to withdraw their endorsement from this guide. It is massively damaging to our sector. They need to robustly challenge the VOA on their valuations and support operators, not the VOA. Operators need to wake up to the damage that the VOA is causing and realise that we can do something about it. We can reject FMT-based valuations, and we can ask instead for the transparent square footage that is used for restaurants. We need to lobby and agitate for change. We need to replace the broken check, challenge, appeal process. Now, we heard it earlier on, somebody mentioned levelling up. There's been an awful lot of talk about levelling up. I say it's time to level up business rates for pubs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Sorry, I was ringing in from the front there, so apologies for that. But we now have to literally run across the road and jump on these buses. You can see just over there, Charlie's waiting by the light. So please grab your stuff as quick as you can. Get over there. We're going to head to Springvale. We'll have some lunch and we'll pick up from there. Thank you.